Hi, it's me, Chio. Welcome. If you're new here, I'm Chio Zoe, a writer and the fantasy author of Memory of Stone series. I'm also a writing mentor and an author tuber. So we're going to be doing a little bit of learning today, and the topic for today is fixing white room syndrome. Now, have you ever been reading a scene in a book and you realize, or the character does something to make you realize you have no idea where or when this is taking place? Or maybe you're reading a chapter or a scene in a book and you're at the very end of the scene and someone does something to make you realize you imagined the wrong room. Maybe you thought they were outside, but all of a sudden you realize they're inside. Yes, all of that falls under white room syndrome. White room syndrome is basically when the author fails to put enough descriptors in a scene to give a reader a sense of where the story is taking place. A good scene description sets the tone for how a book is read. It could be something as blatant as saying they walked into this character's room, or it could be something like they picked up the fork to eat and you can have a sense that they're in a dining room or something like that. So yes, description is very important to set the scenes, to set the tone, and that will give the reader a better sense of what the story is about. White room syndrome is a common trap almost every author falls into when they're writing, because most of the time you're so focused on the story or the characters' dialogue that you forget to actually let us know where any of this is happening. So first, I'm going to be talking about what influences scenes, and by knowing where these scenes occur, the change of scenes occur, we would know how to avoid falling into white room syndrome trap, or at least how to identify when the problem can come up. So there are two major scene types, and that is the when and the where. For the where, that is location. It can be big scale location or small scale location. For big scale location, we have things like continent, country, city. So if it's a made up place, you have to put a lot of description at the early stages of your book for us to know where this is taking place or what the place looks like, from the types of houses and in the environments to what kind of wildlife, vegetation, etc. exists there, if they exist at all. So all of this comes into play in the early parts of your book. But if it's a place that exists, just naming the place might be enough, because we are more familiar with existing places. Maybe you want to say it's happening in Nigeria, or more specifically Abuja or Lagos or wherever. So this is how to establish the where of your place. Either you're using real world places that exist, and the names alone can give the readers an idea of where it's going on, or you're making up the world, so you have to put descriptors to show us what this world looks like, and this happens early on in your story. Now, as you go through your story writing, if the character is going to be traveling and etc., you have to tell us where they're traveling to. If they are in a stationary position or a stationary location, your location can also cover on a smaller scale, indoors versus outdoors. Are they outside in the garden, or are they in a training center? Are they inside the house, or are they walking down the streets? These are important for each new scene you're writing to give us the knowledge, the sense of where it's going on. The when is just as important as the where. For the when, we have things from, is it set in the past, is it set in the present, or is it set in the imagined future? And you identify these things by using technology that either existed in that real world, or technology you think should exist in this fantasy world. So maybe if you're using knights and horses, you can say medieval times. If you're using cars, etc., you can say it's present day time. If you're using something like hoverboards, space travel, etc., that's a more futuristic time. So you have to be mindful to make sure that you're not adding modern technology into an old setting. Again, when is important, and this broader when is established at the early parts of your book, so that your reader can have an idea of when the story is taking place, because that plays a very important role in a lot of stories. Another type of when can be the weather, climate. Are they in a sunny area, dry area, snowy area? You have to add the climate change to that. And another one is time of day. Are they arguing in the daytime, or are they sharing secrets at night time? Knowing when any scene or the whole story is taking place is very important. So you have to be aware of the when and where at every time in your story. Now, with the when and where, like I said, there are descriptors to use to show what the scene is. You can be blatant with explanation by just telling us directly where they are. They're in London, they are at night. Or you could use more subtle descriptions like it was dark, and that will give us a sense that it was nighttime. Or you can say they leaned on the bed and we know that they're indoors. Different things like that to help. Or even in the way they speak. The way they speak can influence the time setting. Are they using old school grammar, or are they using regular day grammar? That will also give you a sense of what the scenery is. So yes, there are many ways and means to go about to establish what a scene looks like. Now, with those descriptors, we can avoid falling into white room syndrome. But what happens when you do fall into that pit and you have to identify it? The first thing to be aware of is that not every writer is skilled at writing scenery. Not every writer is skilled with description. Sometimes we are good with telling story, we are good at talking about the character developments, we are good with dialogue, but we are not very good at establishing scenes. So instead of forcing yourself to write the perfect scene, which can lead to you neglecting your characters, just write what it is you're comfortable writing. Focus on the aspect that you know that your skill can shine through. If it's the suspense, if it's the character quirks, if it's the dialogue, wherever it is, focus your attention there. So you can do your best at that aspect. Now, when it comes to the scenery that you aren't so good at, you can leave that don't stress about it in your first draft. This is an area where in your redrafts, you have time to work on those points. You have to, with each new chapter you write, with each new scene you write, ask yourself if the questions of the when and where were answered. If there was a change in when, did this scene or did this chapter capture that there was a change in when? If you went from one state to the other or one city to the other, did this new scene capture that? Ask yourself these questions with each chapter you go through in your book, if the when and where it was answered. Now, if you can't identify the when and where, this is when working with a critique partner comes into play. A critique partner might be able to spot those missing details that you did not notice. So that is one way to work on fixing white room syndrome. Another thing that I would say I noticed is that it is more common for underwriters to fall into the trap of white room syndrome than overwriters. Because the usual thing with overwriters is that their book is overly written because they are skilled at writing description. But an underwriter is focused on writing the main points of the story and therefore might neglect all the other details that give life to the story. I believe that I'm an underwriter, so I usually just use placeholders instead of writing description. If I don't know what I want this room to look like, etc., I don't bother. I use a placeholder so that I know when to come back or which areas needs working on when I come back to do my redrafts. So if you're an underwriter, be aware that there's a high chance that you might have missed putting enough description in your story, so it needs a rework by your second or third draft. White room syndrome can also be a product of telling versus showing. Sure, when you're telling, we know what's happening, we know they went into the room, and that somehow solved the problem of identifying where an event happened. But if all we're doing is telling, then we miss the interaction of the characters with the spaces they are in. Are they sitting down? Are they standing up? Are they walking around? All of this is expressed through showing rather than telling. And I know sometimes it's like a weird balance, people understanding what telling is and what showing is. But telling is basically just passing the information along, while showing involves putting some type of emotion or character or personality behind expressing what happened in that location. So putting some life, some personality behind each scene or behind what's happening in that scene will help the readers have a clearer picture of what is going on in the space, even if they know where that space is. When it comes to being able to show what's happening in a scene, again, we're talking about descriptions, we're talking about scenery here. It's important to note the five senses, your sense of sight, smell, hearing, taste, feeling. All of this can come into play. If they are in a dark room, they might not be able to use their eyes to see, but they can use their hands to feel around. If they are hiding somewhere, they might not be able to see what's going on outside, but you might be able to overhear the conversation of what's happening. If maybe there is gas leaking, the character can smell something and know that there's something wrong. There are just so many ways to use the five senses, and that is how people interact with spaces. So as a writer, you should not be just focused on telling us what happened there, but explaining it in a way that we know that there's some interaction with one or all five of the senses in that space would help so much in establishing the scene. At the start of this video, I talked about the big and small whens and wheres, from the general location to the smaller scene locations and more. It is important for you as a writer to know when to use the big picture description versus the small detailed description. You have to skillfully weave them into your story, because one or the other would either make the scene too lacking or make the scene too much. What are the things we need to know and don't need to know? If we need to know something, or at least if it's entertaining enough, then put it in. If we don't need to know something, or at least not at that point, then don't put it in at that point. Do we need to know what is in the trash bin? No, except if there's a clue for like a mystery in the trash can. We don't need to know what is inside it. There is an art to slowly revealing details, just weaving it throughout the book instead of info dumping, because in the trap of trying to prevent white room syndrome, you might end up info dumping. So instead of just telling us every single thing found in this space, all types of trees, plants, birds, etc. that exist in this world, we can see how the character gradually interacts with that space. Did they lean on the tree one day? What did that tree look like? Did an animal eat something they were not supposed to? What animal was it, or what food did they eat? Things like that. We don't have to get all of that information at once, but put the most important things that we should know at this point first. Let's basically understand that not every scene deserves descriptions. Avoid info dumping, because it can pull the reader away from the story. So yes, the art of fixing white room syndrome is a balancing act between giving enough versus not giving enough. You have to find out what it is as a reader is important for us to know what's going on or where it's going on in, versus what it is that will distract us from the actual story. In summary, we fix white room syndrome by identifying the when and where in each scene change and knowing what it is to add to those scenes to help the reader on in their imagination process. And that is all I have for you today on fixing white room syndrome. I hope it's been educational in any way, and if it has been, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe and share this video with as many readers, writers, and aspiring writers as you know. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.